All right. Welcome everyone. We're going to get started at 1:30 sharp, so we'll give folks another minute to join in, and then we'll jump in. All right, Alan, I think we can go ahead and get started. What do you think?
Let's wait another couple minutes. I see the attendees joining little by little.
All right, we'll get started in one more minute. We want to make sure we are respectful of everyone's time, so we'll give folks another minute or two to join, and then we'll jump in. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you find this useful. We are recording this, and we'll be sending out the recording afterwards. We'll make it available on the website and on our newsletter and probably social media as well. Welcome to the folks who just joined. We're just waiting for about a minute, just letting folks jump in as they come. We'll probably get started in another, let's say, 30 seconds or so. All right, Alan, what do you think? I think we can jump in. Folks who come late, they can always catch up and view the webinar online.
Let's go.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Today, as you probably guessed, we're going to be talking about what it takes to build applications on top of ChatGPT. All right. So we're just going to go ahead and jump in really quickly. Now, you might be wondering, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to actually build apps on top of ChatGPT? So we're going to get started just by showing you a quick example. So, Alan, if you want to move to the next slide, we'll show you a quick screenshot from something that we've built ourselves. This is a Slack bot that we've built, which connects tools like Salesforce's API and Google Drive and even public documents with your Slack workspace. What that allows you to do is ask questions of your tools in an interactive format and get data back without having to leave your workspace. And this lets you easily get your answers that you need from your tools. Now, when we're talking about building ChatGPT-enabled applications, it doesn't necessarily need to be a Slack bot or even a chat-enabled app. You might be using ChatGPT for workflows. You might be using it for batch jobs. But ultimately, all of the things that you're going to use ChatGPT for custom apps have a lot of things in common. Specifically, you have to build a lot of data pipelines. You have to have permissioning and management, and you have to have a user interface for the most part. We'll be talking about all of these today, and Alan's going to talk a little bit about them later. But we just wanted to get you started with what the heck we're actually talking about today. So with that said, who are we? My name is Shanif Dhanani. I'm the founder of Locusive, previously the founder of Aptio, and originally Tap Commerce and Twitter. Basically, I like to think of myself as a data geek. I have been working in the world of software engineering and AI for quite a while now. And we're now basically working on Locusive, which helps businesses connect their data to ChatGPT. I'll let Alan introduce himself, and then he'll take it from here for a little bit.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Fabian. I have over 15 years experience managing implementations, migrations of cloud and on-prem infrastructures. Prior to joining Locusive, I worked for AWS, where I helped Fortune 500 companies migrate their workloads to the cloud. I'll go over a quick agenda for today. I will cover the first half of this webinar, which will be about what exactly is ChatGPT, some of the use cases of ChatGPT-enabled applications that we have seen our users benefit from. And then Shanif will go over how we go about building such applications, how to get started, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. We'll monitor them and we'll answer them at the end. As Shanif said in the beginning, we will also monitor this webinar, record this webinar and send it to you after the presentation. All right, so what is ChatGPT? I think I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that it kind of took the world by storm over the last few months. It reached 100 million active users in just 2 days. As you can see here, it's a lot faster than the next 2 following apps. Now, everybody that's tried ChatGPT, I don't think anyone has been left unimpressed by how good it is at understanding human language and generating human language. It's very, very good, very fast, and really impressive for everybody that tries it. 6 months ago, probably nobody heard of ChatGPT, and just a couple weeks ago, the founder and CEO of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, was invited in Europe to meet all the key leaders of France, Germany, and the UK. I think this is a testament of how transformative this technology is, and really the impact it can have on businesses and society overall. So at Locusive, we really believe there was a world before and after the internet. There was a world before and after the iPhone, and there will be a world before and after ChatGPT. But what exactly is it? Well, ChatGPT is a large language model application. It's very good at generating language. It's part of the AI family of applications. Now, a lot of talk about AI right now, how it's going to change the world and replace everyone. But really, AI has been there for many, many years. And generative AI, which is basically the type of AI that creates content, could be text, music, video, has also been here for many, many years. And a lot of you have been using it, maybe not noticing it was AI. But simple example is when you open your phone, you start typing a text message, you'll have an autocorrect and sometimes some suggestions about what the next word will be in your text. All that is generative AI. Now, what makes ChatGPT so much more advanced is that it has a foundation model which was built on a lot of data. It's been trained over the years on incredible amounts of data and knows a lot of things about a lot of things. Now, ChatGPT is not the only LLM application out there. You may have heard Google's creating Bard AI or launched it recently. Meta, Amazon, they're all creating theirs. But there's also lots of other models out there that have been there for many, many years. Now, the reason this hasn't been talked as much as this year is just because none of them are quite as good as ChatGPT, which is by far, in our opinion, the most advanced one today. And that's why it's the topic of our webinar. Now, what are the common use cases? When people use ChatGPT, those 100 million active users in 2 days, what have we been doing with ChatGPT? First and foremost, information retrieval is kind of like a key use case for ChatGPT. If you want to search for information, historically, you went to Google, typed the query, got a list of documents, website, you didn't like it, change your query, did it again, saw some documents, clicked on one of them, read through it, it wasn't good, on and on. It was good, but it's not ideal. With ChatGPT, you just ask the question like you would ask your colleague, and it'll give you an answer, a paragraph, 2 paragraphs on exactly what you're looking for. And I think that makes it really, really powerful. Now, it's not just good at information retrieval, it's also great at content generation. You may have heard the stories about schools banning ChatGPT because students were using it to create essays. Yeah, it's very, very good at creating content, text, essays, emails, whatever you needed to create. And it's so good that it's hard to say sometimes if it actually, it's very hard to say, not sometimes, whether it's been created by AI or it's been created by a human. Now, that does raise some ethical concerns, how we're going to know going forward, which is which. That's not the topic of today, but definitely that's an area that needs to be looked at, and how we can distinguish AI versus non-AI content. Now, it's not just good at creating content, it's great at modifying it. So you write up something, you write up an essay, a short blog, whatever it is, and you're not quite happy with it. You want to make it shorter, longer, more detailed, less detailed. You want to change the tone. All of that ChatGPT can do for you. You want to create music, you can ask it to turn into a rap song. It'll do that quite impressively as well. All of that is probably why most of the 100 million active users are using ChatGPT for today. Now, lesser known use case, at least for end users, is automation and efficiency. A lot of businesses are starting to look into that. It's very good at creating code. Because it's so good at creating content, you can use it to automate a lot of your workflows. And that's basically the area we're going to focus on today, is how you can use it to automate and make your business workflows more efficient. Now, let's say you want to use it today. How most people use it today is using the standalone web application. So you log in, you go to the OpenAI website, you log in, within seconds, you're presented with this prompt, and you can go ahead and start chatting and asking any question you want. It's very, very good. Just this morning, my sister wanted to chat with me and had some questions about how to answer some interview questions because she has an interview coming up. And instead of spending half an hour explaining her how to do that, I told her, you know what, let me show you how you could do that in ChatGPT. Within seconds, I showed her how to log into the app, ask sample interview questions, interview answers, tune it, configure it so it is exactly how she wants to answer. And she was left so impressed with it. She said, I'm going to spend all day playing with this. Yeah, it's very, very easy to use, to access, and very, very useful. Now, it's all great for end users, but it's not ideal for businesses. First and foremost, the first reason it's not ideal for businesses is that it's not integrated in your business applications. So if you want to do things in ChatGPT, you need to do it in an environment that's completely different to where you're running all your applications, workflows, etc. Right? You need to basically copy paste data in and out and constantly configure it and tune it. It's not ideal. Second, ChatGPT knows a lot of things about a lot of things, but first, it wasn't trained on data past 2021, so it doesn't know anything current. But more importantly, for a business, it doesn't know anything about the specific context of your business. If you have specific acronyms you use in your business, it's not going to know. If you want to ask questions about specific data and documents only you have access to, it's not going to know, right? But worse, it's prone to hallucination, which means that sometimes it doesn't know and it'll make up answers. And obviously, in a business, that is definitely something you want to avoid. So that in that context, not ideal. And third, but also very important, I mean, data. Every company has some data controls in place in terms of who can access what data. And obviously, if you are to integrate ChatGPT in your business, you want to make sure that the right people can ask the right questions about the data they have access to. So we've seen, it's not all that great for business, but how the businesses can then leverage ChatGPT. Well, that's using ChatGPT-enabled applications, which essentially are accessing ChatGPT not through the web page, but through an API. And you could see that on the example on the left-hand side. You would have some sort of middleware that would be responsible for interacting with ChatGPT using the ChatGPT API. And then you'll have applications, databases, documents that you have within your organization all connected to that. And the middleware is going to be the one that will be responsible for all the logic and all the controls, the context, the tuning, everything you want to do within ChatGPT. It'll control that and then take care of the interactions. Now, the benefits for this are rather obvious. First, you can integrate it within your workflow, right? It's your applications talking to ChatGPT. You don't have to leave your business environment. You can do everything within your current work environment. Second, access to private data and tools. That's to reduce hallucinations, make sure it knows all the context it needs to answer questions the way your business needs it. Third, you can customize and tune it. Again, there's a lot of ways to do some prompt engineering for ChatGPT to make sure it answers the way you want it to. With a middleware, you can let it take care of all of that. Third, we mentioned that before, access controls. Obviously, if you have a middleware in the middle, it can act as a sort of firewall between ChatGPT and your different apps, users, and tools. All that is great, but one of the main drawbacks of that is not that easy to do. There's a lot of technical aspects to building an infrastructure that would support that, and that's what Shanique will cover in the second part of this webinar. Now, before I let Shanique talk about the technical specificities, 3 quick examples of ChatGPT-enabled application we've seen our users leverage. One is the use case around analyzing large volumes of text. ChatGPT is great at reading text, understanding it, and then summarizing it for you. So if you have, for example, lots of user reviews or product data, you want to summarize it, you want to categorize it, you want to get insights from it, you can ask ChatGPT to do all of that for you, and then integrate all the results in the data insights tool, like the one on the right-hand side. In this case, users may never know ChatGPT has been used for any of this, but it's there doing all the computation and logic that you need. Second use case, and this one's dear to my heart because it would have really helped me in my career over the years. There's a lot of data and tools you use in your organization, and not everybody knows how to use every tool as an expert, and not everybody knows where all the data is to answer the questions they have. And so with an application in the middleware, such as the Locusive bot, for example, we developed for one of our clients, you could have a Slack interface. So people use Slack within their business, and you can use Slack to talk to your colleagues. You can use Slack to talk to ChatGPT. And then you can ask questions about your tools. You can ask questions about your data, just the way you would ask your colleagues. It saves a lot of time to everybody to be able to just get all the information they need really, really quickly. If you're interested to see exactly what this could look like, there is a link here for a demo which shows how we created a bot that answered all these questions on Data and Tool. Last but not least, you can integrate ChatGPT directly within your existing web applications. On the left-hand side is an example of a real estate website. So for example, my wife is a real estate agent. She has to create listings. So she enters in her tool bedrooms, bathrooms, and then she has to write a little blurb that will make people excited to come and see the apartment she's listing or the house. Believe it or not, she tells me that prior to ChatGPT, they used to pay someone to create that summary. They would send what they need, wait a couple of days, and then they will get back a little summary. They will put that in the listing, maybe cost a few $100s. Now, what she tells me is that since ChatGPT came out a couple of months ago, her and all her real estate agent friends, they all use ChatGPT to do that. They log into the website, they enter their entire listing information, they enter the tone in which they want it, and then they get, they play with ChatGPT for an hour or so, and then they get the listing summary, which they can put in their tool. Now, this went from a couple of days to an hour, but what if you can make it even quicker? And that's where we can build applications directly embedded with ChatGPT, where with just a click, ChatGPT will know exactly what your context is, what you're looking for, and will give you exactly the right information you need. So it went from a couple days before ChatGPT to maybe an hour with ChatGPT to really a couple seconds if you integrate ChatGPT in your applications. Real quick, the last example I have on here is around reading your emails. A lot of people use emails all day. They exchange hundreds of emails with their clients, customers, peers. Sometimes they want a summary of everything that was discussed. ChatGPT is great at text. It can analyze all your emails with the click of a button. It can give you a summary of the whole thread. So all this are some good examples, but really your imagination's the limit. Every day we have calls with clients who have new ideas of how they could leverage ChatGPT. And really, there's many, many ways in which businesses can benefit from this. Now, let's say you want to go ahead and start looking into building an application such as the ones we've seen for your business. Sharif will now cover the technical details to get that done.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Alan. So you guys probably have a sense now of what it takes to maybe get started. We're going to try to clarify that a little bit. So on the next slide, we've basically built what we think about we built the pyramid of how we think about creating apps on top of ChatGPT. It's a lot like creating traditional software applications, but now you have this sort of foundational layer with ChatGPT. This might be an embedded component, like their API might just be another API you plug into, but it's so powerful that what we've done is sort of use it as the foundational layer for the apps that we've built. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to spend more time on the next 4 steps up. Right after the ChatGPT layer, you've got infrastructure. And this is really where the hard part comes in. I like to say that it's really easy to talk to ChatGPT, but everything else is hard. And that everything else is sort of the infrastructure. All of the pipes, all of the cloud stuff, all of the permissioning, the management that you need in order for your app to actually run. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges there. once you've got your infrastructure in place, you've got to start thinking about the data. The data is sort of the gold mine of what it is you're using ChatGPT for. We'll talk about why you need data, how it works, and how you can essentially get data to flow from your third-party apps or your internal documents to ChatGPT. Then one step up, you've got fine-tuning and prompt engineering. Once you've got the data, you basically need to know how to talk to ChatGPT so it can give you the answers you need. And then one step up, the final layer is the application layer. You can think of this as the front end or the chatbot or the website that you've basically provided to your users for them to get a sense for your app. So we'll just jump in right now and we're going to go through each of these. We'll start with infrastructure. And basically what we wanted to give you a sense for is this is our architecture diagram for the Slack bot that we built. And it's a little complicated, right? There's a lot of stuff that's going on. And so you can easily build an application on top of ChatGPT that just talks to its API, but you're going to be missing things like permissioning. You're going to be missing things like user management. You might be missing things like having a nice front end. In this architecture diagram, what we're trying to show you is there's a lot of components that go into this. You might have a simple Slack bot for the user, but that Slack bot has to talk to an API service and an application layer and a chat service. And the chat service might have tools that maybe 20 or 30 tools that it can provide for your user at any given stage. And the chat service needs to figure out which tools to use. So there's a lot that goes into this. And so that's why we think that it's important to get a sense for what it is you want to do before you start building. So let's actually just go ahead and jump into some of the common errors or problems that we've seen when it comes to building infrastructure. The first thing that you've got to think about is how are you actually talking both to your user as well as ChatGPT. So there's a challenge in establishing communication. Now, like I said, it's really easy to get set up with their API, but your application also needs to talk to all of your third-party services. That might look like issuing a query to a Salesforce API or reading a document from Google Drive. Once you've got that communication in place with ChatGPT, you've got to figure out how to get it access to what it needs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the data section. On top of that, permissioning and data security are a big thing, especially for MSEs, mid-sized enterprises, and larger enterprises. And one thing that you might have kind of gleaned as we were talking was when you talk to ChatGPT, you're working through its API. It's a really simple API. You just send in a string or text, and you get back string or text. Now, the beauty of that is it's extremely simple for developers to work with. But the hard part is you need to send everything in your text prompt to ChatGPT all at once. And so when you're doing this, sometimes you might forget that a user who has a document in your organization, maybe other users shouldn't be able to see that document. Now, the way that you're traditionally working with this stuff, you store documents in a vector database and you query them back from ChatGPT or the application layer, and permissions might be lost. So your application needs to worry about permissioning and management upfront. And then finally, once you've got your base application in place, you need to be able to scale it and make sure that it's robust. A couple of the things that we run into, so ChatGPT's rate limits are not that great. We, in general, tend to find when we're running batch workflows on their websites, on their API, we can send no more than maybe 5 or 10 requests at a time, which is actually quite low. Or if you've got a chatbot, for example, like what we've built, you might be able to answer 3 or 4 questions at a time. But if you've got 50 users on your Slack bot, you're going to run into these rate limits. And so you're going to need to be able to, 1, deal with them, and 2, scale out of them if you actually have the ability to do so. Now, I could probably talk to the idea of infrastructure for a long, long time, but we want to make sure we're efficient with your time. And so what we're going to do now is just jump into some of the challenges when it comes to data. So data is really the heart of what it is that you're trying to do. Whether you're trying to classify it or transform it or generate it, you've got to be able to get ChatGPT the right data at the right time. Now, this is actually good and bad. So there's a few things to keep in mind here. If you're connecting ChatGPT to a few of your other tools, let's say you've got a JSON-based API that you're trying to connect to, you might retrieve JSON from your API and you might be able to send it directly into ChatGPT and it might be able to parse it or it might not. And so what you've got to do is work with the LLM, the large language model underlying ChatGPT, to make sure that it can understand essentially what it is that you're sending in. So making sure that you're prompting ChatGPT, making sure that you're sending in information that it can actually use to answer your question, it's all really big. And then we're actually just going to jump back into the world of data security here because it's that important. Private data has a lot of, there's a lot of nuances when it comes to integrating private data. So what do I mean by private data? Well, we built a bot that integrates your Salesforce account. Now, you as an organization might have 1,000 leads in your Salesforce account, but each individual person can only access their account, and maybe they only have 5 leads in Salesforce. And so you're going to need to be able to figure out how do you best work with personal data, and then how do you work with private data from an organizational perspective. What we have done and what we'd recommend doing is creating an external permissions management store. What we've started to use is this thing called REBAC, relation-based access control, where you keep track of the documents that each user has from the permissioning system or the source system that they've already got. And when you're querying ChatGPT, you don't provide any documents to ChatGPT that the querying user doesn't have. Well, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here. Essentially, what we're trying to say is using data with ChatGPT has a lot of nuances. But once you figure out, maybe you've got your data, you've got the right pipelines connected to ChatGPT. Maybe you even need to figure out where the data set is that you need. You're then going to have to be able to talk to ChatGPT correctly. So we can move on to the next slide and talk about fine-tuning and prompting. And this is a question I get a lot. So I'm going to spend just like a couple of minutes here talking about what this actually means. Now, if you've got your own business data, for example, I was talking to one company who has a lot of medical information, you might be interested in having ChatGPT learn from your system, learn from your data, and sort of talk your language. There's 2 key ways that you could do this. One is called fine-tuning, and the other is what I'll call contextual information retrieval. Fine-tuning, really interesting, but not a lot of people use it. It's the idea that you can train ChatGPT on your own data and then have it answer with your own data. Now, why aren't a lot of people using this if it's so interesting? Well, it's because, one, OpenAI only lets you do this for ChatGPT 3. It doesn't actually let you do this on its newest models, which means you might lose a little bit of robustness and sophistication. And then 2, really the bigger problem here is in order to fine-tune one of the ChatGPT models, you need to provide it a lot of examples. The examples are basically a pair of 2 things. One is the example question that you might want it to answer, and then 2 is the example answer. And you need to have at least a couple hundred of these examples, more like probably a few thousand. So the reason people don't tend to do fine-tuning is because they don't have the time or energy to create these examples. So the other thing that you can do is provide context to ChatGPT when you provide it a question. And this can all be done through the API. Now, in order to do this, you have to do a few things when you're sending in the context. You have to make sure that the context is accurate. So just like with the website, ChatGPT only lets you send about, let's say, 3,000 to 4,000 words for ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo in their API. What this means is if you've got a knowledge base of several thousand documents, you're going to need a smart and intelligent way to pick out the right context from these documents and then send those to ChatGPT at the right time. Traditionally, the best way to do this right now is by using a vector database, which we won't talk about too much today. All you need to know is vector databases allow you to find the best documents for a particular user's query by matching that query with the content from the documents. All right, so that's a little bit about prompt engineering, but now I want to talk a little bit, before we move on, about hallucinations. This is a big one from the world of business, and in fact, this might be the biggest concern that businesses have when they talk to me. And the idea is, hey, look, I'm maybe making a chatbot for all my users, or I'm making a question and answering system. How do I make sure that the system doesn't make anything up? And my answer is there's sort of one good way to do this, and that is to provide the context that ChatGPT should use to answer a question at the same time that you ask that question. Assuming you have not fine-tuned ChatGPT, which so far none of our customers have done, you're going to need to be able to provide the right context, and then you're going to need to prompt ChatGPT, and you're going to need to tell it, hey, only answer the question given the context above or below. And you're also going to need to tell it, do not make anything up and do not guess. If the context does not provide the right information, you have to say, I don't know. This all goes into tuning and prompt engineering for ChatGPT. which is not that tough. It's not, you don't need to take a course on it. You don't need to become an expert. You just sort of need to learn how to talk to this system in a logical way. All right, so I spent a little bit of time talking about tuning and prompt engineering. What I wanted to talk about next was the application layer and talking about what it actually means to build an app on top of ChatGPT. Well, you can think of it, a ChatGPT component, as any other third-party component in your website. If you're building a weather app, you might reach out to a weather API and get information from that. If you're building a chatbot, you're going to reach out to ChatGPT's API. There's a few things to keep in mind here. Their API, as you've seen on the website, one of the things they do is they sort of type out word by word the answer to your prompt. And that makes it feel like it's responding faster than it actually is. Now, you can do this on the API, but more likely than not, you're probably going to use their API that just returns a big blob of text all at once. And this could take a little bit of time, especially if you've plugged in third-party tools, or you have some sort of auto GPT system, which is where you talk to ChatGPT back and forth in order for your application to understand what to do next. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because you have to make sure that your users are, one, aware that you've actually received their message, and two, that you're working on it. So if you're building a chatbot, you have to add those little widgets for spinners or loaders or an icon to show them that you've got their message. You have to be able to respond to them in real time. You know, if you don't receive a response back from ChatGPT in a minute or 60 seconds, you have to say, hey, I'm still working on this. There's all sorts of these little tweaks you have to build into your app to keep aware of the fact that you're now working with a system that has latency. And not only does the system have latency, but it's also what I like to say stochastic or a little bit random. You might ask a question of ChatGPT in the same way 9 times or 10 times, and you'll get a different answer maybe 1 out of 10 times. So your code's got to be structured well enough that it can handle a response from ChatGPT that is close enough to what you need. So those are application layer concerns. And then finally, a lot of times users are going to want to be able to tweak or change the response that they're getting from ChatGPT. A lot of times on the website, for example, I might get a bad answer and I say, I can easily chat into the website, hey, this is wrong, please update it for me. If you're building an app, you may not have the ability to allow users to change that answer interactively. And so your app's going to need some way to allow a user to update or modify whatever it is that they need from the system. In the case of a chatbot, it's not that big of a deal. One thing I will actually caution you to do, though, is when you're sending messages to ChatGPT, make sure to send the history of the messages between the user and the system, because ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 can use historical messages to better inform how they respond to a user. So lots we could go over here, but the point that I'm trying to make here is when you think about building an app on ChatGPT, there's all of these layers you have to think about. It's very similar to a traditional software application, but you now have more flexibility, but you also have to think about the consequences of using something that's not entirely stochastic or 100% the same every time. All right, so I could probably drone on and on about that, but really what happens if you want to, let's talk about what happens if you want to start using ChatGPT yourself. Getting started is something that a lot of folks that we talk to, they get tripped up on. Maybe they've got 15 ideas about how they think ChatGPT can help, and they're struggling to figure out which one to start with, or they think that it's going to change their business entirely, and they want to start right away. When we start a new project with a customer, we recommend doing one thing, which is in the ideal scenario, taking one problem that your business is facing. That problem should be something that's tedious and time consuming, or that requires maybe a bunch of interns to do, or requires 30 minutes out of your day to do, and basically use that as a contender for a proof of concept application. We recommend starting small. Now, this is brand new technology. It probably will change the world, but you probably need to start close to your business when you're starting to integrate it. So you should start with a problem that you've already got, something that takes up a lot of your time and is ideally something that's tedious and repeatable. If you don't have a problem that you want to start with, but you've got an opportunity or a new feature you want to build, that's also okay. But in both cases, what you want to do is you want to basically put a boundary around your point of proof of concept. You want to figure out exactly what it is, the goals that you're trying to solve, and build the minimum application that you can to solve those goals. So once you do a POC, you're going to come across probably all the technical issues that we've talked about in the previous 4 or 5 slides, especially around building infrastructure. That will essentially help you understand how much investment you need in order to build this thing out more fully. So a POC allows you to save time, and it allows you to get something out the door very quickly, and then you can build up around that. This is not that surprising, right? If you've built software before, you've probably done a very similar approach. But when we've talked to folks, especially a lot of business owners and execs who want to use ChatGPT, they have these grand visions, and maybe they're not able to articulate what they need. Once you get started with one particular application, you're going to learn a lot. And so just start small with 1 or 2 engineers. You should be able to build something out within a couple of weeks for very low cost. All right, so that being said, we have found a couple of resources that we've found useful when we've been building applications. The OpenAI documentation is fantastic. They're very, very good at helping you understand what it is that you need to get started with and how you can actually use ChatGPT. Their developer forums are also good. What's not listed here, but one thing I've also used recently is something called LangChain. It's a Python library, and their documentation is also very good. Now, each of these pieces of documentation are good for understanding what you can do with their systems, but they also start to enlighten you on what's possible, and they give you ideas for how you can work with these systems for your own applications. And finally, what we're trying to do is just be a resource for the community. So if you've got questions, I've talked to a lot of you, feel free to email me, feel free to jump on a call. We're also looking to start a community Slack group for folks who are building on top of ChatGPT. If that's interesting for you, just let me know, and we'll add you to the inaugural group. All right, so that's pretty much it. I'll kick it over to Alan. If you all have any Q&A or questions, please feel free to type them up into the chat bot. We wanted to make sure we were efficient with your time, but please, this is your chance to ask us anything that you've got. So Alan, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, Shanif. First question we have here is, what is the difference between ChatGPT 3.5 Plus and 4.0? How do I know which version I'm using on the web?
It's a great question. There's all sorts of technical issues behind that, but 3.5 is very good. It's one of their, it's not the newest model. It tends to be faster. It's very good at reasoning and analytics, but not as good as ChatGPT 4. It's also, I think, very cheap compared to ChatGPT 4. I don't remember if it's an order of magnitude cheaper. So taking a step back, both 3.5 and 4 will do what you need. 4 tends to be really, really good at answering edge case questions or answering something in a way that provides more detail. I think they've got fewer hallucinations. And it's just one of those things where, depending on your needs, if you want something fast and accurate, you go with 3.5. If you care really a lot about accuracy, reliability, robustness, 4 might be the better bet. But they're both very, very good in what they do. For what it's worth, ChatGPT 4's API has been limited. Now, I don't know if you guys saw yesterday, they put out an announcement that they're saying they're going to release it to everybody. So I would recommend going up and signing up for the waitlist for ChatGPT 4's API, just so you have the notification when they start rolling it out. But that's sort of all sort of besides the point. Hopefully that answered the question, Alan, in a way that made sense.
No, that's great. The second question I have here, Shanif, which is a question I love to ask you when I work with it, is how to avoid the hallucinations.
I think, it's one of those things that it's something that I get from every consultation call I do. There's 2 things I would do here. The first one is what I call contextual learning. Just provide the context for the system to answer your question at the right time. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to provide the exact answer to ChatGPT so that it formats it in a nice way. That could look like providing 20 or 30 documents for it to read through and then provide you an answer from those documents. But the best thing you can do is provide it context so that it can answer your question. Ask it to source or cite that question and provide you the link so that you can go in and double check it yourself. There is something called few-shot learning or one-shot learning. And that's the idea where you give ChatGPT a few examples for how you will provide it input and then how you want it to respond to you. And you can start to do few-shot learning to provide maybe 2 or 3 examples of how you'd like it to respond before you ask it your question. That can work for helping it guide how it thinks about things, how it answers to you. It may or may not help with hallucinations, but from what I've seen, it is very useful in making sure that you get the output that you need. Even if it doesn't know something, it'll be able to tell you something that it'll be able to tell you it doesn't know. So wrapping that up, few shot learning and providing the context at the time that you ask a question.
Thanks, Sharif. Another question here. What are some of the challenges you see when you scale your POC into production?
I think that the hardest thing with scaling a POC, there's a few things here. So we're working on a couple of projects right now. One of them has nearly 100 million user-generated documents, and the goal of the POC was first to prove out that ChatGPT could be used to classify those documents. Scaling that out now, in order for this thing to run on all 100 million documents, has been an interesting challenge in infrastructure. One of the challenges we ran into, as I mentioned earlier, was ChatGPT's API rate limit. And in my opinion, this is still really, really bad, but it's one of those things that's likely to improve. You can only send ChatGPT a few queries at a time. So the first challenge I ran into was, how do we take all 80 million or 100 million documents and make sure that we can process them appropriately? We came up with a strategy of just taking a subset of those that are the most important and doing those first, and then queuing up the rest. Another thing we've run into is providing access controls. So certainly something that, let's say you've got documents coming in from 4 or 5 different sources, maybe your historical Slack messages and Google Drive and your CRM. You have to be able to maintain access controls across all of that. So you almost have to build your own internal access control tool for anything that integrates lots and lots of different data. Now, if you're just building one thing on one data source, you're probably okay. But as you're building larger and more complicated enterprise layer applications, maintaining access controls is a big thing that we've run into. We've solved it, like I said, with something called relationship-based access controls. That's what Google uses for all of their internal tools. They have a tool called Zanzibar that they built, and we're using something called Auth0 FGA. But yeah, scaling it, I would say dealing with rate limits and dealing with access controls are 2 big things you're going to run into with scalability.
One thing I'd add on those rate limits, I read a lot the forums, and I myself interact with the OpenAI folks a lot. The rate limits, there can be exceptions. You can ask for approvals to get higher rate limits. If you provide a solid business case, they'll do that for you. I haven't seen many developers being blocked because they weren't getting the rates they want or need, but it's not automatic. So yeah, you'll have to work with them and have solid use cases for it.
Cool. Anything else? Are we good to go, Alan?
Nope, I don't see any further questions. But of course, after we conclude this webinar, we will send you the presentation as well as our contact information. And please feel free to reach out and ask any follow-up questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for the time. Appreciate it. Use us as a resource. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye-bye.